Let my mum go and I'll cure your illness." Everyone laughed until the unbelievable happened. Richard Anderson was sitting in his leather armchair when he heard the child's voice cut through the silence of the hall. 3 men in suits stopped talking at the same time. The proposal coming from that child was too absurd to be taken seriously. "If you release my mother from the contract, I promise I'll cure you," said the girl, her voice trembling but not lowering her eyes. Richard didn't respond. He just watched the child standing at the hall door, her fists clenched at her sides. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old. "Who let you in here?" asked one of the men in suits, the tallest one, with an irritated tone. "I came in by myself," replied the girl. "My mother has worked here for 3 years. She takes care of Mr. Anderson every day." Richard slowly rose from the armchair. His eyes met the child's. There was something in that gaze that bothered him. Determination. It wasn't common to see that in someone so young. "Your mother is going to be in trouble for this," said the tall man. "You can't just barge into a meeting." "Let her speak," Richard interrupted, raising his hand. The 3 men exchanged glances. One of them, the oldest, began to chuckle softly. "Are you seriously considering this?" he asked, still laughing. "A child saying she can cure you?" "I didn't say I believed it," Richard replied without taking his eyes off the girl. "I just want to hear what she has to say." The girl took a step forward. Her hands stopped shaking. "My mother is trapped here because of a debt my father left before he went away. She works every day, from 7 in the morning until 9 at night. She's tired. She cries when she thinks I'm not watching." The child's voice grew firmer. "I know you can't feel anything anymore. My mother told me. She said you became like this after your family left." The silence that settled in the hall was heavy. The 3 men in suits weren't laughing anymore. Richard remained motionless, his face completely expressionless. "Everyone has tried to help you," the girl continued. "There's a doctor who comes here every week. There are medicines, but nothing works, right? Because your problem isn't about medicine, it's about something else." "And you think you know what that something else is?" Richard asked, his voice monotone. "I do," the girl replied without hesitation. "You've forgotten how to feel love. I can make you remember." The oldest man laughed again, this time louder. "This is ridiculous," he said, shaking his head. "Richard, you're not going to waste time on this." "How much time do you need?" Richard asked, ignoring the comment. The girl thought for a moment. 30 days. 30 days, Richard repeated, as if testing the weight of those words. "And if you can't? Then my mother keeps working here and I'll never bother you again. And if you succeed, I'll release your mother from the contract," Richard completed. "That's right." The 3 men began to protest at the same time, but Richard raised his hand again and everyone fell silent. "You have 30 days, he said to the girl, "starting tomorrow." The child gave a small smile, the first since she had entered the hall. She nodded and turned to leave. That's when the door swung open forcefully, and a woman appeared, her eyes wide with fright. "Emily!" the woman shouted, running to the girl and pulling her by the arm. "What are you doing here?" It was Sarah, the nurse who had been taking care of Richard for 3 years. She was still in her impeccable uniform, but her face showed panic. "Mom, I just came to talk to Mr. Anderson," Emily said, trying to free herself from the grip. "You can't do this," Sarah said through her teeth, pulling her daughter toward the door. "I'm sorry, Mr. Anderson, this won't happen again." "Actually, it is," Richard said, making Sarah stop in her tracks. "Your daughter and I made a deal." Sarah turned slowly, her face pale. "What deal?" "She has 30 days to cure me. If she succeeds, you're free from the contract," Richard explained in his usual emotionless voice. "If she fails, you continue working here, and she never shows up again." "Mr. Anderson, please," Sarah began, but Richard was already leaving the hall. "The deadline starts tomorrow," he said, without looking back. The 3 men in suits followed right behind him, leaving Sarah and Emily alone in the empty hall. The woman looked at her daughter with a mix of despair and anger. "What have you done?" she whispered. "I'm going to save you, Mom," Emily replied, holding Sarah's hand. "I promise." Sarah knelt in front of her daughter, her hands trembling as she held Emily's small face. "You don't understand what you've gotten into," she said, her voice breaking. "Mr. Anderson isn't a normal person. He hasn't felt anything for years. The best doctors in the country have tried to help. How do you think you'll succeed?" "I will," Emily insisted. "I saw it in his eyes. He's not dead inside. He's just hidden." Sarah closed her eyes and pulled her daughter into a tight hug. She had no idea how this would end, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. That night, in the small house they shared at the back of the property, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept watching Emily, who slept peacefully in the bed next to hers. The child had no idea of the weight of what she had promised. Richard Anderson was one of the most powerful men in New York City. He ran a technology company worth billions, but all that wealth meant nothing to a man who couldn't feel happiness, anger, sadness, or any other emotion. Sarah knew the story well. She had been there for 3 years, ever since Richard started needing constant care. His inability to feel emotions had started suddenly, after an event that no one in the house dared to mention. The doctors called it severe emotional blunting. They said it was psychological, not physical. But no treatment had worked. And now, her 9-year-old daughter thought she could solve a problem that the best specialists in the country couldn't. Sarah turned in bed, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. The contract that bound her there was real. Her ex-husband, Emily's father, had borrowed money from the wrong people before disappearing. When the debt collectors showed up, Sarah had no way to pay. It was Richard who offered a solution. He would pay off the entire debt if she worked for him for 5 years. 3 years had already passed. Only 2 remained. But those 2 years felt like an eternity when she saw Emily growing up alone, spending most of her time with Mrs. Jenkins, the paternal grandmother who lived in a simple house on the other side of the neighborhood. The next morning, Emily woke up before sunrise. She dressed quickly, brushed her teeth, and combed her long hair quietly so as not to wake her mother. When Sarah opened her eyes, the girl was already sitting at the table, eating bread with butter. "You're not going to give up, are you?" Sarah asked, sitting next to her. "No," Emily replied with her mouth full. "Emily, you need to understand something." Sarah held her daughter's small hand. "Mr. Anderson isn't bad. He's just broken. And broken people sometimes hurt others without meaning to." "I'm not afraid of him," Emily said, swallowing the bread. "I know, but I'm afraid for you." Emily looked at her mother with those big eyes, too serious for a 9-year-old. "Mom, you're tired. I see you crying in the bathroom. I hear you sighing when you think I'm asleep. I need to do something." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes, but held them back. She kissed her daughter's forehead and got up to get ready for work. When it was time to start her shift, Sarah went up to Richard's room for the usual routine. He was already awake, sitting in the chair near the window, looking at the garden without really seeing anything. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," Sarah said, placing the breakfast tray on the table. "Is your daughter coming today?" he asked without taking his eyes off the window. "She'll come after lunch. She has to go to school in the morning." "How old is she?" 9. She'll be 10 in December." Richard didn't respond. Sarah checked his blood pressure, noted the numbers on the chart, and organized the medications he needed to take. "Mr. Anderson," she said hesitantly, "you don't need to do this. I'll fulfill the contract until the end. My daughter is just a child. She doesn't understand." "I know she's just a child," Richard replied, picking up the juice glass Sarah had left on the table. "That's exactly why I'm curious to see what she'll do." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. She left the room quietly. Emily arrived at 2 in the afternoon, carrying a pink backpack on her shoulders. She went up the stairs to Richard's room without asking anyone for permission. She knocked on the door 3 times and waited. "Come in," his voice came from inside. The girl opened the door and entered. Richard was in his usual position, sitting near the window. "Hi," Emily said, closing the door behind her. "Hi," he replied. "I brought something." The girl opened her backpack and took out a sketchbook and a box of colored pencils. "I draw well. I'm going to make a drawing for you." Richard watched as she sat on the floor, cross-legged, and opened the sketchbook to a blank page. She took a blue pencil and began drawing without saying anything else. Silence settled in the room. Richard looked out the window again. Emily drew intently, biting her lower lip every time she needed to make a more difficult stroke. 40 minutes passed. The girl finally got up and showed the drawing to Richard. It was a colourful house with a garden full of flowers, a large yellow sun in the corner, and 3 people holding hands in front of the house. "It's for you," she said, holding out the paper. Richard took the drawing and looked at it for a few seconds. "Thank you," he said, placing the paper on the table beside him. "You didn't like it?" Emily asked. "It's not that I didn't like it," Richard replied. "It's that I don't feel anything when I look at it." "Not yet," the girl said, picking up her backpack. "I'll be back tomorrow." She left the room, leaving Richard alone with the colourful drawing on the table. In the following days, Emily showed up every day at the same time. She always brought something different. On the second day, it was a storybook that she asked to read aloud. Richard didn't interrupt her, so she read 3 complete stories before leaving. On the third day, she brought a checkers set and taught Richard how to play, even though he showed 0 interest. On the 4th day, she simply sat on the floor and began talking about her day at school, about the teacher, about her classmates, about everything. Richard never reacted. He listened to her in silence, sometimes responded with monosyllables, but never showed any kind of emotion. Emily didn't seem to mind. She kept coming back. In the kitchen, the mansion's employees began placing bets. Martha, the cook, said the girl would give up in a week. Michael, the gardener, bet on 2 weeks. Deborah, the housekeeper, was more generous and said 3 weeks. "The girl has courage that nobody can deny," Martha said while chopping vegetables. "But courage isn't enough against what the boss has." "What exactly does he have?" Michael asked, grabbing a coffee. "He has a hole in his chest where his heart should be," Deborah replied, wiping the counter. "A hole that no one can fill." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Sarah listened to those conversations and felt her heart tighten more and more. She saw her daughter trying day after day without managing to elicit any reaction from Richard. Emily would come home every afternoon with a smile on her face, saying it was working, that she noticed small changes. But Sarah saw no change at all. Richard remained the same empty man as always. On the 5th day, Emily did something different. Instead of going straight up to Richard's room, she asked Sarah to show her where the rest of the house was. Sarah hesitated but eventually agreed. They walked through the huge hallways past the library, the music room, the office. "And this room?" Emily asked, stopping in front of a locked door at the end of the hallway. Sarah turned pale. "That room cannot be opened." "Why?" "Because Mr. Anderson doesn't allow it." "But what's inside?" Sarah looked around before answering, her voice low. "It was his son's room." Emily was silent for a moment, processing that information. "He had a son?" "He did," Sarah confirmed, "but that was a long time ago. No one talks about it." "And the son left?" Sarah didn't know how to answer, how to explain to a 9-year-old something she herself didn't fully understand. She just nodded. "Let's go," she said, pulling Emily by the arm. "You need to go to Mr. Anderson's room if you want to continue with this." But Emily didn't forget about that locked room. She went up the stairs thinking about it, entered Richard's room still thinking about it, and spent the whole afternoon observing the man sitting near the window while her mind worked on figuring out a way to open that door. That day, she didn't bring any games or drawings. She simply sat on the floor and started asking questions. "Were you ever a child?" she asked. Richard looked at her for the first time that afternoon. "Everyone was a child once. And what was it like when you were a child?" "I don't remember." "Everyone remembers when they were a child," Emily insisted. "I remember when I was 5 and my dad took me to get ice cream. I remember he let me choose 3 flavors and I chose chocolate, strawberry and lemon. It was the best ice cream of my life." Richard didn't answer, but something changed in the room's atmosphere. A nearly imperceptible tension. "Did you like ice cream when you were a child?" Emily continued. "I liked strawberry," Richard answered after a long silence. "Only strawberry?" "Only strawberry," Emily smiled. "Then we have similar tastes. I really like strawberry too." She stayed in the room for 15 more minutes, asking simple questions about Richard's childhood. He answered some, ignored others. But for the first time, he seemed to be really paying attention to her presence. When Emily left that day, she found Deborah in the hallway. "Deborah, who has the key to that locked door?" she asked, pointing to the end of the hallway. "Only Mr. Anderson," Deborah answered suspiciously. "Why?" "Just curious," Emily said, shrugging. But it wasn't just curiosity. That night, back in the small house with her mother, Emily lay awake thinking. If Richard's son's room was locked, it meant he didn't want to remember. And if he didn't want to remember, it was because it hurt. And if it hurt, it meant he was still capable of feeling something. It was just a matter of finding the right thing. On the 6th day, Emily arrived with a new strategy. She didn't ask questions about Richard's childhood. She didn't bring drawings or games. She arrived empty-handed and sat on the floor as always, but this time she started talking about her father. "My father left when I was 6, she said, looking at her own hands. "He left home saying he was going to buy bread and never came back. My mother cried a lot in the first few days. I cried too. But then we stopped crying because we realized crying wouldn't make him come back." Richard said nothing, but Emily noticed he had stopped looking out the window and was now looking at her. "I keep wondering if he thinks about us," she continued. "If he remembers my birthday. If he misses me. Then my mother said that sometimes people leave not because they don't love us, but because they can't stay. She said sometimes life gets too heavy and people run away." "Your mother is right," Richard said, his voice lower than usual. "Do you think so?" Emily looked at him. "I do," he confirmed. "Sometimes staying hurts more than leaving." "But leaving doesn't make the pain go away," Emily said. "It just moves the pain somewhere else. Now the pain is in my mother, and in me. So in the end, it didn't solve anything." Richard closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, he looked straight at Emily. "You're very smart for a 9-year-old. My grandmother says I'm old inside," Emily replied with a small smile. "Your grandmother is right." They stayed silent for a few minutes. Emily got up from the floor and went to the window, standing next to Richard. "What are you always looking at out there?" she asked. "Nothing," he replied. "You can't look at nothing," Emily said. "There's always something. There's the garden. There are the trees. There are the little birds." "I look without seeing," Richard explained. "It's different." "Then you need to start seeing again," Emily said, placing her small hand on his arm. Richard looked at that hand for a long moment. He didn't remove it. When Emily left the room that day, she passed again through the hallway with the locked door. She stopped in front of it and put her hand on the dark wood. There was something important inside. She could feel it. On the 7th day, Emily didn't show up. Richard waited all day, but she didn't come. But Sarah went up to do the usual routine, and he asked where the girl was. "She's not feeling well," Sarah replied, checking his blood pressure. "I think she caught a flu at school." "Will she be all right?" Richard asked. Sarah looked at him, surprised. It was the first time he had shown concern for anyone since she had started working there. "Yes," she answered. "It's just a flu. She should be better tomorrow." But Richard didn't seem convinced. He spent the rest of the day looking at the door, hoping Emily would appear. That night, something unusual happened. Richard left his room and went to the kitchen where Martha was preparing dinner. "I need you to make some soup," he said. Martha almost dropped the knife in surprise. Richard never went to the kitchen, never asked for anything directly. "Soup, sir," she repeated. "Chicken soup, with vegetables. The best you can make," he explained. "It's for Sarah's daughter. She's sick." Martha stared at him open-mouthed as he left the kitchen. "I don't believe it," she whispered to Deborah, who had witnessed everything. "He cared about something." "It's the girl," Deborah replied, equally surprised. "She's doing something to him." Martha made the best soup she could. She put it in a thermos, wrapped it carefully, and took it to the small house at the back of the property. Sarah answered the door, her eyes widening at the sight of the cook standing there. "Mr. Anderson sent this for Emily," Martha said, handing over the thermos. "He said it's for her to get better soon." Sarah took the jar with trembling hands. She couldn't say anything, just nodded in thanks. When she closed the door, she leaned against it and let the tears fall. It was the first time in 3 years that Richard had shown any kindness. Emily ate all the soup that night. She told her mother it was the best soup she had ever tasted, and Sarah agreed, even though she hadn't eaten any. That soup tasted of hope. On the 8th day, Emily was back. She excitedly climbed the stairs and entered Richard's room with a smile on her face. "Thank you for the soup," she said. "It was really delicious." "How do you know it was me?" Richard asked. "My mother told me," Emily replied, sitting in her usual spot. "You were worried about me." "It wasn't worry," Richard said too quickly. "It was just convenient. If you got sick, you'd miss days of our agreement." "That's okay," Emily said, still smiling. "It could be that." But both of them knew it wasn't just that. That day, Emily started telling Richard stories from school. She talked about the math teacher who was very strict, about the boy in class who always stole others' snacks, about her best friend who had moved to another city. Richard listened to everything in silence, and for the first time every now and then, he asked a question. "And were you sad when your friend left?" he asked at one point. "Very," Emily replied, "but we still talk sometimes. She sends me letters." "Letters," Richard repeated, surprised. "Don't you use the phone?" "Letters are more special," Emily explained. "When you write a letter, you think about every word. It's different from just sending a quick message." Richard was silent for a moment. "I used to write letters," he said, his voice distant. "A long time ago." "To whom?" Emily asked, curious. But Richard didn't answer. He went back to looking out the window, and Emily knew she shouldn't push. Not yet. In the following days, a routine was established. Emily always arrived at 2 in the afternoon and stayed until 4. Sometimes she talked a lot. Sometimes she stayed silent beside Richard. He began to respond more, to ask more questions, but always keeping that neutral, emotionless tone. It was on the 12th day that Emily finally asked about the locked door. "Mr. Anderson, can I ask a question?" she said, more serious than usual. "Go ahead." "Why is that door at the end of the hall always locked?" The air in the room changed instantly. Richard became completely still. "It's none of your business," he said, his voice sharp. "I know it's not," Emily continued, brave. "But I think what's behind that door is important. I think it's one of the things you're trying to forget. You don't know what you're talking about." "I do know." Emily stood up. "You locked that door because you're afraid of what's inside. But what's inside doesn't go away just because you don't look at it. It stays there waiting." "Get out," Richard said, his voice low but firm. "Now." Emily hesitated for a moment, but ended up grabbing her backpack and leaving. When she closed the door, she leaned against it and took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking. She had touched on something important, something painful. Richard was left alone in the room, his hands gripping the arms of the chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He closed his eyes and tried to breathe, but his breath was difficult. For the first time in years, he felt something close to panic. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about that locked door, thinking about what was behind it, thinking about everything he had left behind. On the 13th day, Emily returned as if nothing had happened. She entered the room with a smile and sat on the floor. "Sorry about yesterday," she said. "My mom said I shouldn't have talked about that." Richard didn't answer. "But I still think I'm right," Emily continued. "You can't keep running away forever." "I'm not running away," Richard said. "Yes, you are. And I understand. When my father left, I wanted to run away too. I pretended he never existed. I tore up his pictures. But one day my grandmother told me something that changed everything." "What?" Richard asked, almost against his will. "She said you can't erase people from your life. They stay there, being part of us, even when they're gone. And the more we try to forget, the stronger the memory becomes." Emily looked straight at Richard. "So we need to make peace with the memories. We need to look at them and say, okay, you're part of me. I accept that." Richard stayed silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, weaker. "It's not that simple." "I know," Emily said. "But it's better than spending your whole life running away." She didn't mention the locked door again that day, but she had planted a seed, and both she and Richard knew it. That night Sarah talked with her daughter about what had happened. "Emily, "You need to be careful," she said, worried. "Mr. Anderson is a very wounded man. If you poke at those wounds too much, you could hurt him, and you." "Mom, his wounds are already hurting him," Emily replied. "Every day. They're just hidden under a bunch of walls he built. I need to help him tear down those walls." "But you're just a child." Sarah held her daughter's face with both hands. "This shouldn't be your responsibility." "But I'm the one who promised," Emily said. "And I'm not giving up. There are still 18 days left." Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, wishing she could protect her from all the weight she had placed on her own shoulders. On the 14th day, something happened that changed everything. Emily arrived at the usual time, but as she was about to go upstairs, she heard voices coming from Richard's office. She recognized one of them. It was the doctor who visited Richard every week. "You need to understand that this situation with the child is harmful," the woman's voice said, firm. "She's interfering with your treatment." "She's not interfering with anything," Richard's voice replied. "Yes, she is. You're starting to have emotional reactions. This could lead to a collapse," the doctor insisted. "I strongly recommend that you end this ridiculous arrangement and return to the protocol we established." "I'm not ending anything." "Richard, you're not seeing clearly. This girl is playing with things she doesn't understand. She's going to end up making everything worse." The doctor's voice became lower, almost soft. "You know I've always taken good care of you. Trust me." Emily felt a tightness in her chest. She didn't like that woman. She never had, from the first time she saw her. There was something fake about her. She waited for the doctor to leave before going up to Richard's room. When she entered, he was tenser than usual. "I heard," Emily said, closing the door. "Heard what?" "The doctor saying I'm getting in the way." Richard sighed. "She's worried." "She's not worried about you," Emily said with conviction. "She's worried about herself." "Why do you say that?" "Because I saw the way she looks at you. She doesn't want you to get better. She wants you to keep needing her." Richard fell silent, processing those words. He had never thought about it that way, but now that Emily had said it, it made sense. Dr. Patricia had been treating him for over 2 years. She charged a lot for each session. If he got better, she would lose one of her most profitable clients. "You're very observant," he finally said. "My mother says I pay too much attention to things," Emily replied, sitting on the floor. "But I think people don't pay enough attention." That day, for the first time, Richard smiled. It was a small smile, almost imperceptible, lasting less than a second. But Emily saw it, and her heart skipped a beat. "You smiled," she said, her eyes shining. "I did not," Richard quickly denied. "Yes, you did. I saw it." "It was a muscle spasm." "It was a smile," Emily insisted, laughing. "Admit it." Richard shook his head, but there was something different in the air, something lighter. In the following days, Emily intensified her efforts. She began bringing old photos she found around the house, photos the staff kept in boxes in the basement, photos of parties, trips, happy moments. She showed them to Richard and asked him to tell her about each one. At first he resisted, said he didn't remember, said it didn't matter. But Emily was persistent, and little by little he began to talk. Small details, names, places, stories. That's how Emily learned about Richard's wife. Her name was Catherine. She was an architect. She had died in a car accident 5 years ago, and with her their 6-year-old son, Nathan, had also passed away. Emily didn't ask how it happened. She didn't need to. The pain on Richard's face when he spoke those names said it all. "You loved them very much," she said softly. "More than anything," Richard replied, his voice breaking for the first time since Emily had met him. "And do you think forgetting them will make the pain go away?" "I don't want to forget them," Richard said, closing his eyes. "I just want to stop missing them so much." "But missing them is proof that they were important." Emily held Richard's hand, too small to cover his completely. "Missing them isn't bad, it's just painful." Richard opened his eyes and looked at that 9-year-old girl holding his hand. She was right. She was right about so many things. "How did you get so wise?" he asked. "I'm not wise," Emily replied. "I just haven't learned to lie to myself yet." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That night something extraordinary happened. Richard left his room for the first time in months and went down to the basement. He searched through the dusty boxes until he found what he was looking for: a photo album, the family album. He went back up to his room and spent the entire night flipping through the pages. Each photo was a stab in the chest, but he didn't stop. He looked at each one, remembered every moment, allowed the emotions to return, and for the first time in 5 years, Richard Anderson cried. He cried silently, alone in the dark room, as the photos of Catherine and Nathan looked at him from the yellowed pages. He cried for the loss, for the longing, for the love he still felt and didn't know where to place. When the sun rose, he was exhausted but different. Something had changed in him, something fundamental. On the 18th day, when Emily arrived, she noticed the change immediately. "You're different," she said, studying his face. "Am I?" Richard asked. "Yes. Your eyes are different. Less empty." Richard picked up the photo album that was on the table and handed it to Emily. "I spent the night looking at this," he said. Emily opened the album carefully, as if it were a fragile treasure, and it was. She saw photos of a beautiful woman with dark hair next to Richard. He looked younger, more alive, and there was a boy, a little boy with big eyes who smiled in every photo. "They were beautiful," Emily said, her voice gentle. "They were," Richard agreed. "I spent so much time trying not to think about them that I ended up forgetting how good it felt to remember the happy moments. And now? Now it still hurts. But it's a different kind of pain. It's a pain I can carry." Richard looked at Emily with something close to gratitude. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up on me." Emily smiled and hugged the album to her chest. "I told you I would heal you, and I always keep my promises." But the journey was far from over. Emily had managed to make Richard start feeling again, but there was still the locked door. There was still Nathan's room, untouched for 5 years. And as long as that room remained locked, a part of Richard would remain trapped too. It was on the 20th day that Emily made a bold decision. She waited until everyone was asleep, took a hairpin, and went down the stairs quietly. She had seen a video online on how to open simple locks with hairpins. She didn't know if it would work, but she had to try. She reached the locked door and knelt in front of it. She inserted the hairpin into the keyhole and began to wiggle it, trying to feel the internal mechanism. It took almost 20 minutes, but finally she heard a soft click. The door opened. Emily turned on her phone's flashlight and entered the room. It was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was exactly as it had been left 5 years ago. Toys scattered, books on the shelf, clothes folded on the chair, drawings pinned to the wall. She walked around the room slowly, touching each item carefully. There was so much love in that space, so much care in every detail. The walls were painted light blue with white clouds. There was a collection of toy cars on the shelf, a stack of storybooks beside the bed. Emily picked up one of the books and opened it. On the first page it was handwritten, "To Nathan, with love, Mom and Dad." She felt tears burning in her eyes. That boy had been deeply loved, and Richard had lost everything. She stayed in the room for almost an hour, just looking, trying to understand. When she finally left, she didn't lock the door again. She left it slightly ajar. The next day, Richard discovered it. He walked down the hallway and saw the door open. He stood frozen for a moment, then entered the room. Emily was there, sitting on the floor, rearranging the toys that had fallen from the shelves over the years. "What are you doing?" Richard asked, his voice trembling. "I'm taking care of Nathan's things," Emily replied without looking at him. "No one has taken care of them for a long time." "I told you to stay out," Richard said, but there was little conviction in his voice. "I know, but someone needs to do this." Emily finally looked at him. "You can't leave everything here frozen forever. Things need care. Memories need care." Richard took one step forward, then another. He knelt beside Emily and picked up one of the toy cars she had just cleaned. It was a red car, worn from so much use. "This was his favorite," Richard said, his voice barely audible. "He took it everywhere." Then we should put it in a special place, Emily suggested, taking the car and placing it in the center of the shelf. They stayed there together for hours, tidying the room, dusting, organizing the memories. Richard cried several times, but he didn't stop. Emily stayed by his side the whole time, silent when he needed silence, speaking when he needed words. When they finished, the room was impeccable, as if it were waiting for Nathan to return at any moment. "Thank you," Richard said, sitting on the small bed. "I couldn't have done this alone." "You're not alone." Emily sat beside him. "You never were." Richard looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a child, but an extraordinary human being who had entered his life and refused to let him sink into darkness. "You've already won," he said. "The agreement. You've already healed what I thought couldn't be healed." "There are still 10 days left," Emily reminded him. "It doesn't matter. Your mother is free. I'll cancel the contract today." Richard stood up, his legs trembling slightly. "And I'll do more than that. I'll pay all the remaining debts. I'll give you a better house. "You don't need to do any of that," Emily interrupted. "I didn't do this for a reward. I did it because you deserve to be happy again." Richard felt something break inside him, a final barrier falling. He knelt before Emily and hugged her, and for the first time in 5 years, Richard Anderson felt something he'd forgotten existed: hope. Sarah learned the news an hour later. Richard called her into his office and handed her the contract papers, all marked cancelled. "You're free," he said, "and all debts have been paid. You owe nothing more." Sarah stared at the papers, unable to believe it. Tears began falling before she even realized. "Mr. Anderson, she began but couldn't finish. "No need to thank me, thank your daughter. She did something no one else could." Richard picked up an envelope from the desk. "And this is for you, to start a new life." Sarah opened the envelope and saw a check for an amount she never imagined seeing in her lifetime. "I can't accept this," she said, trying to return it. "Yes, you can. And you will," Richard insisted. "It's the least I can do. Emily gave me my life back. That's priceless." That night, Sarah hugged her daughter and cried with relief, with gratitude, with love. They were free. Finally, free. But Emily and Richard's story didn't end there. In the following days, something unexpected happened. Dr. Patricia discovered what had happened and became furious. She went to the mansion and confronted Richard. "You've made a terrible mistake," she said, storming into his office. "Opening these old wounds without proper professional support could cause severe psychological collapse." "I'm fine," Richard replied calmly. "You think you're fine, but it's only a matter of time before everything falls apart." Patricia crossed her arms. "And when that happens, you'll come looking for me again, and I'll be here to clean up the mess this child made." "The only mess here is you," Emily said, entering the office. She had heard everything from the door. "You shouldn't be here," Patricia turned to her, her tone condescending. "This is adult conversation." "Adults who don't know how to truly help," Emily retorted. "You didn't want Mr. Anderson to get better. You just wanted him to keep paying for sessions." "That's outrageous," Patricia pretended indignation. "I've dedicated years of my career to helping Mr. Anderson." "You spent years making money from his pain," Emily corrected. "It's different." Richard rose from his chair and walked to stand between Emily and Patricia. "Emily is right," he said. "I realized that in recent weeks. You never encouraged me to face the past. You just gave me medication to numb my emotions. That's not healing. That's running away." "You're making a mistake," Patricia repeated, but there was something desperate in her voice now. "Without proper treatment, you'll end up worse." "Then I'll get worse," Richard said firmly. "But it will be by my choice. I won't live numbed anymore just because it's easier." Patricia realized she had lost. She grabbed her purse and slammed the door on her way out. When her footsteps faded down the hallway, Emily looked at Richard with admiration. "You were very brave," she said. "I learned from you," Richard replied, placing his hand on her shoulder. But the battle with Patricia wasn't over. She was an influential woman in New York City's medical community. She began spreading rumors that Richard was having a psychotic break, that he was being manipulated by a child and her opportunistic mother. She called the executives at Richard's company, suggesting he was unfit to make important decisions. The rumors reached Sarah, who became desperate. "She's going to ruin everything," Sarah told Emily that evening. "She has enough power to make people believe her." "Then we need to prove she's wrong," Emily replied. "How?" "By showing that Mr. Anderson is better than ever." In the following days, Richard did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He returned to working in person at the company. He attended meetings, he made important decisions, and everyone who saw him noticed the change. He was different, more present, more alive. The executives who had been worried about Patricia's rumors quickly changed their minds. Richard was clearly better than he had been in recent years. Patricia tried a few more attacks, but none succeeded. She even threatened to sue Richard for medical negligence for abandoning treatment. But his lawyers handled shutting down any legal threat before it could advance. Eventually, Patricia gave up and left the scene, but the damage she had tried to cause left marks. There were employees at the house who had believed the rumors. There were people at the company who still looked at Richard with suspicion. That's when Emily had another idea. "We need to do something big," she told Richard one day. "Something that shows everyone that you're okay." "What are you thinking?" Richard asked. "A party," Emily replied, her eyes shining. "A party in memory of Catherine and Nathan. We invite everyone who knew them. We celebrate their lives, not their absence." Richard was silent for a long moment. "I don't know if I can," he said finally. "Yes, you can." Emily held his hand. "And I'll be there with you." The party was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Richard hired event organizers, had invitations made for all of Catherine and Nathan's old friends, all their co-workers, everyone who had been part of their lives. Sarah helped with the preparations. Mrs. Jenkins, Emily's grandmother, was hired back as the cook for the occasion and prepared all the favorite dishes that Catherine used to make. Martha, Deborah, and Michael worked tirelessly to make the garden and the house impeccable. On the night of the party, hundreds of people showed up. The garden was lit with soft lights. There were photos of Catherine and Nathan everywhere, but not in a gloomy way. It was a celebration. Richard gave a short but emotional speech, thanking everyone for being part of his family's life. He talked about Catherine, about her love for architecture and plants. He talked about Nathan, about how the boy was curious and loved toy cars. And he cried as he spoke, but they were tears he was no longer ashamed to shed. When he finished the speech, he looked at Emily, who was sitting in the front row next to her mother, and gestured for her to come up to the makeshift stage. "I also want to thank someone very special," Richard said when Emily reached his side. "This 9-year-old girl managed to do something that the best doctors in the country couldn't. She taught me that it's okay to feel pain, that it's okay to cry, that it's okay to remember, and more importantly, she taught me that it's possible to love again." The audience applauded. Many were crying. Emily blushed with embarrassment, but smiled. The party lasted until late at night. People shared memories of Catherine and Nathan. They laughed, they cried. It was exactly what Richard needed, a validation that those 2 lives had meant something, that they hadn't been forgotten. When everyone left and the house was empty again, Richard, Sarah, and Emily sat on the front steps, looking at the lit-up garden. "Thank you," Richard said to the 2 of them, "for everything." "We're a family now," Emily replied, leaning her head on his arm. "Families help each other." And in that moment, Richard realized she was right. They were a family. Not the family he had lost, but a new family. Different, but equally important. But life, as always, still had more surprises in store. A few weeks after the party, Richard received an unexpected call. It was from his brother, Daniel Anderson, whom he hadn't seen in over 3 years. "I heard about the party," Daniel said on the phone. "I read about it in the newspaper." "And," Richard replied, cautious, "I wanted to talk to you. In person." Richard hesitated, but agreed. Daniel arrived at the mansion 2 days later. He was younger than Richard, but looked older. There was a hardness in his face that wasn't there before. They met in the office. Emily wanted to stay, but Richard asked her to wait outside. She obeyed, but stayed near the door, listening. "You're different," Daniel said. sitting in the chair across from Richard's desk. "I am," Richard confirmed. "I heard a child helped you," Daniel continued, his tone hard to decipher. "It's true. And that you cancelled her mother's contract, paid all their debts, gave them money. Also true." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I came here to make you an offer a few months ago. Do you remember?" Richard remembered. Daniel had offered to buy a significant part of the company, arguing that Richard wasn't in a condition to run it properly. Richard had refused at the time. "I remember," he said. "I also offered money to the girl's mother, so they would leave," Daniel went on. On the other side of the door, Emily's eyes widened. It had been Richard's uncle who had tried to bribe Sarah. "Why?" Richard asked, his voice growing colder. "Because I thought she was taking advantage of you. I thought it was a scam." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "But I was wrong." "Were you?" "I saw you at the party. I saw how you were. You're really better. The girl really helped you." Daniel ran a hand over his face. "And I came here to apologize. For doubting. For trying to interfere." Richard studied his brother for a long moment. Was there sincerity there, or was it just another move? "Why did you really want me to stay sick?" Richard asked straight out. Daniel was silent for a moment, then sighed. "Because it was easier," he admitted. "With you out of the picture, I had more power in the company, more influence. I won't lie and say I didn't like that. But seeing you at that party, I realized what I was doing was cruel. You're my brother, and I was hoping you'd stay broken." Richard felt a mix of anger and sadness. Anger at the betrayal, sadness for having lost so much time apart from his brother. "I don't know if I can forgive you," he said finally. "I don't expect forgiveness," Daniel stood up. "I just wanted you to know the truth, and I wanted to say that from now on, you can count on me. For real this time." He extended his hand. Richard looked at it for a long moment before shaking it. When Daniel left, Emily came into the office. "I heard everything," she said, unashamed. "I figured," Richard replied, almost smiling. "Are you going to trust him again?" "I don't know," Richard admitted, "but I'll give him the chance to prove he's changed. Everyone deserves a second chance." Emily nodded in agreement. She sat in the chair Daniel had just left. "Things are working themselves out," she said. "They are," Richard agreed, "thanks to you." "It wasn't just me," Emily corrected. "It was you too. You were the one who had the courage to change." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like the video and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. In the following weeks, life around Richard began to take on colors he had forgotten existed. He went back to work regularly, made important decisions at the company, and even started appearing at social events. People commented on his transformation, some with admiration, others with skepticism, but no one could deny that something had fundamentally changed. Emily continued visiting Richard regularly, even after Sarah's contract was officially terminated. They had moved to a small but comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, bought with part of the money Richard had given them. Sarah got a job at a nearby hospital, with better hours and less stress. But there was something Emily noticed about Richard. Even with all the progress, there were still moments when he became distant, moments when his gaze would get lost in emptiness. She knew the healing wasn't complete. Perhaps it never would be. It was Mrs. Jenkins who gave Emily the next clue about what to do. Emily's grandmother had started working regularly at the mansion again, not out of necessity, but because she liked to stay busy, and because she had a special fondness for Richard, dating back to the times she worked there before the tragedy. "You know what I remember about Mr. Anderson before everything happened?" she said to Emily one day, while they were preparing cookies in the mansion's kitchen. "He played the piano. Every evening after dinner, he would sit at the piano and play. Sometimes classical music, sometimes popular songs. Catherine and Nathan loved it." "And he stopped after they were gone?" Emily asked. "He stopped. The piano is still in the basement to this day, covered with a cloth." Mrs. Jenkins stirred the cookie dough. "It's a shame. He was very good." Emily became thoughtful. She vaguely remembered seeing a covered piano when she had gone down to the basement to look for photos. At the time, she hadn't paid much attention to it. But now... That afternoon, instead of going straight up to Richard's room, Emily went down to the basement. She found the piano exactly where her grandmother had said. It was a beautiful grand piano, but it was dusty and abandoned. She removed the cloth covering it and ran her hand over the keys. It was out of tune, but it still worked. She pressed a few keys, the sound echoing strangely in the silent basement. Emily made a decision. She was going to learn to play the piano, not perfectly, but enough to play one song for Richard, a song that meant something. She spent the next 2 weeks watching videos on her phone, practicing secretly in the basement whenever she could. Her fingers hurt from repeating the same chords over and over, but she didn't give up. She practiced in the morning before school, in the afternoon before visiting Richard, and at night when her mother was already asleep. Sarah noticed her daughter was hiding something, but didn't ask. She trusted Emily. The song Emily chose to learn was simple. The House by Robert Frost. It was about home, about family, about the people who make a house a home. She found it appropriate. On the 27th day since the original agreement began, Emily finally felt ready. She asked for help from Michael, the gardener, and together they brought the piano up from the basement back to the music room on the ground floor. It took hours and a lot of effort, but they managed. Then Emily invited Richard to come downstairs. He was confused but followed her down the stairs to the music room. When he saw the piano there, uncovered and clean, he stopped in the doorway. "What is this?" he asked, his voice faltering. "It's a surprise," Emily replied, sitting on the piano bench. Emily. "Just listen to me," she requested, her fingers already positioned on the keys, and she began to play. It wasn't perfect, far from it. She missed a few notes, hesitated in some parts, had to start over twice, but she played with heart, with intention, with love. Richard stood frozen in the doorway listening, and as Emily played, memories began to flood his mind. Memories of other nights, other moments, when he was the one sitting on that same bench, playing that same piano with Catherine and Nathan listening. He remembered the first time he played for Catherine back when they were dating. He remembered Nathan climbing onto the bench beside him, trying to imitate the finger movements. He remembered quiet nights, laughter, music filling every corner of the house, and something inside him, something that had been frozen for so long, began to melt. When Emily finished the piece, she turned on the bench to look at Richard. He had tears streaming down his face, but at the same time he was smiling. "It was awful, I know," Emily said nervously. "I only learned it 2 weeks ago and—" "It was perfect," Richard interrupted, his voice choked. "It was the most perfect thing I've ever heard." He walked over to her and hugged her tightly. Emily hugged him back, feeling his tears wet her hair. "Thank you," Richard whispered. "Thank you for reminding me of what I had forgotten." "What did you forget?" "That I can still be happy, that I'm still allowed to be happy." He pulled back a little to look at her. "And that Catherine and Nathan would want me to be happy." Emily smiled through her own tears. They really would. That night, Richard sat at the piano again for the first time in 5 years. He played for hours. He started with songs that Catherine loved, then played songs that Nathan used to request. And gradually he began to improvise, creating new melodies, songs that spoke of pain and overcoming, of loss and new beginnings. Sarah listened from the kitchen, where she was helping Mrs. Jenkins prepare dinner. She took her mother-in-law's hand, and they listened in silence, moved. "Your daughter performed a miracle," Mrs. Jenkins whispered. "She did what no one else could," Sarah replied, proudly. But even with all this progress, there was still one last obstacle, one last challenge that Richard needed to face. The cemetery. Since the accident, Richard had not visited Catherine and Nathan's graves. He couldn't. Just thinking about going there made his chest tighten and sent him into a panic. But now, he knew he had to go. It was the final barrier between him and true healing. He talked about it with Emily a few days after the piano night. "I need to go there," he said, "but I can't go alone." "Then don't go alone," Emily replied simply. "I'll go with you." "You would do that?" "Of course, we're in this together, remember?" Richard nodded, moved. They went on a Saturday morning. Sarah and Mrs. Jenkins also came along for support. It was a clear morning, with the sun shining but not too strong. When they arrived at the cemetery, Richard hesitated at the entrance. His hands were shaking. Emily held one of them, Sarah held the other. "We'll go at your pace," Emily said. They walked slowly along the cemetery paths. Richard knew the way by memory, even though he had never been there after the funeral. It was as if his feet remembered on their own. When they reached the graves, Richard stopped a few feet away. There were 2 headstones side by side, simple but beautiful. Fresh flowers adorned both. "Someone has been coming here," Richard said, surprised. "I have," Mrs. Jenkins admitted softly. "I come every week. I always thought someone should take care of it." Richard looked at Emily's grandmother with gratitude. "Thank you." He took a deep breath and took the final steps to the headstones. He knelt on the grass in front of them and reached out his hand, touching the cold marble. Catherine Miller Anderson, beloved wife and mother. Nathan Anderson, our eternal boy. "Hi," Richard said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come. I couldn't. But I'm here now." Emily knelt beside him in silence, just being present. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there," Richard continued, tears falling freely. "I should have picked you up that day. I should have cancelled the meeting. I should have—" "You couldn't have known," Emily gently interrupted. "No one could." "I know," Richard admitted. "But I still feel guilty. I still feel like I could have done something different." "And you'll always feel a little of that," Emily said. "But you can't let that guilt stop you from living. Because Catherine and Nathan wouldn't want that." Richard looked at her, his eyes red. "You're right. They wouldn't want that." He stayed there for almost an hour, talking to Catherine and Nathan. He told them about everything that had happened in the last few months. About Emily, about the move, about the piano, about the party. He apologized. He said he loved them. He promised he would live in a way that honored them. When he finally stood up, he seemed lighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "We'll come back often," he said to Emily. "Together." "Together," she agreed. The following week, Richard did something no one expected. He announced he was creating a foundation in the name of Catherine and Nathan Anderson. The foundation would be dedicated to helping children who had lost their parents, offering psychological, educational, and financial support. "My family can't be here anymore," he said in the official announcement, "but their legacy will continue to help other families. It will continue to make a difference." The news caused a stir. The press covered it extensively. People from all over the country started getting in touch, offering donations, offering help. And Richard put Sarah as one of the foundation's coordinators. She had experience with care, had empathy, had an understanding of the pain these children felt. "I don't know if I'm qualified," Sarah said when Richard made the proposal. "You are more than qualified," Richard insisted. "You raised an amazing daughter on your own. You know what it's like to overcome difficulties. You're perfect for this." Sarah accepted, moved. The foundation started operating 3 months later. They rented a large space in an accessible neighborhood and began receiving the first children. There was a playroom, a library, therapy rooms, a space for physical activities, and on Saturdays, Richard went there personally. He played piano for the children, talked with them, listened to their stories. And gradually he realized that by helping these children heal their wounds, he was also healing his own. Emily also became a volunteer at the foundation. She helped the younger children with homework, played with them, listened to their fears and hopes. One day, an 8-year-old girl asked Emily how she was so brave. "I don't have any special courage," Emily replied. "I just learned that sometimes we need to do difficult things for love." "But you're just a kid too," the girl insisted. "That's true," Emily agreed. "But being a child doesn't mean we can't make a difference. Sometimes children can see things that adults have forgotten how to see." This conversation reached Richard's ears, and he realized once again just how special Emily was. She wasn't just a brave child, she was a force of nature, a small light that had entered his life when everything was dark. Months passed. The foundation grew. It helped dozens of children. Stories of overcoming began to appear. Children who had been lost in pain were now finding strength to move forward. And Richard continued to improve. He wasn't completely healed. There were still difficult days, days when the longing hit hard. But now he had tools to deal with it. He had people around him who supported him. He had a purpose. It was on one of those days, almost a year after that first meeting in the hall, that Richard called Emily for a serious talk. They were sitting in the mansion's garden, under a large tree. Sarah was there too, as was Mrs. Jenkins. "I have a proposal to make," Richard began, nervous in a way Emily had never seen. "What proposal?" she asked, curious. "I would like to officially adopt you," Richard said straight out. "Not to replace your father, you already have a father, even if he's not present, but to be a father figure in your life. To make official what already happens in practice. We are a family." Emily was speechless. She looked at her mother, who was crying but smiling at the same time. "And I accept you too, Sarah," Richard continued. "Not romantically, but as part of my family. You two changed my life. You gave me a reason to live again. And I want to repay that by being the family you deserve." Mrs. Jenkins was already crying too, wiping her tears with her apron. Emily said nothing for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked over to Richard, and hugged him tightly. "Yes," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. "We're already family anyway. But it would be nice to make it official." Richard hugged her back, laughing and crying at the same time. Sarah joined the hug, then Mrs. Jenkins, and they stood there, the four of them together. A patched-up but strong family, a family born from pain but built with love. The adoption papers took a few months to be processed. There was bureaucracy, interviews with social workers, evaluations, but eventually everything was approved. On the day the adoption became official, they held a small celebration at the mansion. Only close people. Martha made a huge cake. Michael brought flowers from the garden. Deborah decorated the whole house. And Richard gave Emily a gift. It was a small box. Inside was a necklace with two pendants. One said Emily and the other said Nathan. "I want you to know that you're not replacing anyone," Richard explained as he put the necklace on her. "Nathan will always have a place in my heart. But you opened a new space, a space that only you occupy, and I want you to know that you are as loved as he was." Emily touched the pendants carefully, tears streaming down. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me be part of his family." "Thank you for letting me be part of yours," Richard replied. That night, while everyone was celebrating, Richard went up to Nathan's room. He was no longer afraid to go in there. He sat on the small bed and looked around. "Nathan," he said aloud, "I have a sister for you now. Well, not biologically, but from the heart. Her name is Emily, and she's amazing. She's brave and smart and kind. I think you would really like her. I know she would really like you." He was silent for a moment, just feeling the presence of the memories. "I will never forget you," he continued, "or your mother. You will always be a part of me. But I'm learning that it's possible to love again without diminishing the love I feel for you. The heart has no limit on love. It just grows." When he went back down to the party, Emily was playing the piano. It was the same song she had played for him months ago, but now it was better, softer, more confident. Richard sat beside her on the bench and began to play along. 4 hands on the same piano, creating a beautiful and harmonious melody. Everyone stopped to watch. Sarah held Mrs. Jenkins's hand. Martha wiped away a tear. Michael smiled. It was a perfect moment. A moment that showed that from the deepest pain can come the purest beauty. When the music ended, Emily leaned her head on Richard's shoulder. "I love you, Dad," she said for the first time. Richard felt his heart tighten, but in a good way, in a way that made sense. "I love you too, daughter," he replied. And in that moment, surrounded by his new family, Richard Anderson realized something fundamental. He had been healed. Not of the pain, because the pain of losing Catherine and Nathan would never completely go away, but he had been healed of the inability to feel, of the numbness, of the emptiness. Now he felt everything, the sadness and the joy, the longing and the love, the pain and the hope, and he wouldn't have it any other way. because to feel even when it hurts was to be alive, and being alive was the greatest honor he could pay to the memory of the people he had lost. In the following months, life continued its natural course. The foundation kept growing, helping more and more children. Richard became an active businessman again, but now with renewed purpose. He used his influence and resources to make a difference in the world. Sarah flourished in her role at the foundation. She discovered a vocation she didn't know she had, working with those children, helping them process their traumas, to find hope again, filled a void inside her that she didn't even know existed. Mrs. Jenkins continued cooking at the mansion, but now as part of the family, not as an employee. She told old stories to Emily, stories about Richard when he was young, about Catherine and Nathan, keeping the memories alive but not painful. And Emily grew up. She was still that special girl, but now with the security of having a strong family around her. She kept visiting the foundation, kept helping other children, kept being the light that had changed everything. 1 year after the official adoption, on Emily's 10th birthday, Richard organized a big party. He invited all the children from the foundation, all the mansion employees, all the old and new friends, and he prepared a surprise. When everyone was gathered in the garden, Richard climbed onto a small makeshift stage. "I'd like to say a few words," he began, and everyone fell silent. 2 years ago, I was a dead man inside. I had lost the most important people in my life, and I thought I would never be able to feel anything again. But then a 9-year-old girl appeared with an absurd proposal. She said she could heal me if I freed her mother from a contract. People laughed, and Emily turned red, hiding her face in her hands. I accepted because I thought it would be funny to watch her try, Richard continued, smiling. But she didn't just try. She succeeded. She didn't heal me with medicine or complicated therapies. She healed me with presence, with persistence, with pure and honest love. He paused, emotional. Emily taught me that it's okay to feel pain, that it's okay to cry, that it's okay to remember the people we've lost, and more importantly, she taught me that it's possible to build a new life without disrespecting the old one, that the heart has room for multiple loves. He looked straight at Emily. So today, on your 10th birthday, I want to thank you publicly. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing something in me that no one else saw. Thank you for giving me a reason to live again. Everyone applauded. Emily was crying, as was half the people there. But Richard hadn't finished yet. And as a thank you, I have a special gift, he gestured, and Daniel brought over a plaque covered with a cloth. The foundation we created in memory of Catherine and Nathan is getting a new name. From now on, it will be called the Emily Anderson Foundation for Children's Support. He pulled the cloth away, revealing the plaque with the new name. Emily was speechless. She looked at her mother, who was smiling through tears, then looked back at Richard. I can't accept this, she said. The foundation is in memory of Catherine and Nathan. And it will continue to be, Richard replied. But now it's also in your memory. In memory of the girl who saved a broken man, who showed that love and courage can heal even the deepest wounds. Emily couldn't hold back any longer. She ran to Richard and hugged him tightly, while everyone applauded and cried along. It was one of the most beautiful moments anyone present had ever witnessed. It was pure love. It was family. It was proof that even in the most desperate situations, there is always hope. The party continued late into the night. Children ran through the garden, adults chatted, music played. It was life, it was joy. It was everything Richard thought he would never have again. That night, after everyone had left, Richard, Sarah, and Emily sat on the mansion's front steps, looking at the starry sky. "You know what I was thinking," Emily said, breaking the comfortable silence. "What?" Richard asked. "Life is funny. 2 years ago, my mum was stuck here working to pay off a debt. I was sad watching her suffer, and you were sad thinking you would never feel anything again. And now look at us. Look how everything has changed. It changed because you had the courage to try something that seemed impossible," Sarah said, kissing her daughter's head. "It wasn't just me," Emily insisted. "It was Mr. Richard who had the courage to let me try. It was you, Mom, who taught me not to give up on people. It was Grandma Agnes who told me about the piano. It was everyone together. Richard nodded in agreement. You're right. Healing isn't something that happens alone. It's a collective effort. It requires the person who's hurt to want to get better. It requires people around them willing to help. It requires love, patience, and time. And it requires courage, Emily added. A lot of courage. They stayed silent for a few more minutes, just enjoying the moment. I'll never be able to thank you enough, Richard finally said, for everything you've done. You don't need to thank me, Emily replied. Family doesn't thank. Family just loves. And it was true. They were a family now. Not a traditional family, perhaps. A family made of choices, not blood, but no less real for it. In fact, perhaps more real, because when you choose someone as family, when you decide to love someone not out of obligation but by choice, that love is even stronger. In the years that followed, this family would continue to grow, continue to evolve. There would be challenges, of course. There always are. But they would face them together. And Richard would continue to honor the memory of Catherine and Nathan, no longer through forgetting but through life, through love, through making a difference in the world, because in the end, that's what they would have wanted. Not a man paralyzed by grief, but a man living fully, loving completely, doing good whenever possible. And all because of a 9-year-old girl who refused to accept that some things can't be healed, who saw a broken man and decided he was worth trying to put back together, who understood, with the wisdom that only some children possess, that true healing doesn't come from forgetting the pain, but from learning to live with it. Months turned into years. Emily grew up and became a teenager, then a young woman, always keeping that special essence that defined her. She studied psychology in college, to no one's surprise, and returned to work at the foundation full-time. Richard continued running his company, but now with a better work-life balance. He never lost the habit of playing piano every night, and often Emily would join him. Sarah eventually met someone, a kind widower, who worked as a volunteer at the foundation. They married a few years later, and Richard walked Sarah down the aisle, proud. And Mrs. Jenkins lived to see her great-grandchildren, Emily's children, running through the same gardens where she had comforted a broken man so many years earlier. The story of how a 9-year-old girl healed a millionaire businessman who couldn't feel emotions became legend in the city. People told and retold it, each version slightly different, but all capturing the essence of the truth, that love heals, that hope persists, that it's never too late to start over, and that sometimes the most unlikely people save us in the most unexpected ways. End of story. And you, what did you think of this story? Do you believe Emily made the right decisions by taking such risks to help Richard? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever experienced a situation where someone's love helped heal a deep pain. We'd love to read your opinion. Don't forget to leave your like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.